Welcome! The purpose of this video is to walk you through how to create an ASCII file. Now, an ASCII file is a file that is created when we pull data out of SBC, and we can pull just about any kind of information out of the system that you'd like. One caveat to that is that you need to know, number one, what the file name is of where you're pulling the data from, obviously, but second, you have scenarios where you have two files or three files where you're going to pull data from so that you can get all the pieces of the information that you need. For example, when you're pulling information out of the archive, you're going to pull it out of two places. One place is called the header file, and that's where you get the information of who you sold it to, how much money the grand total was of the ticket and the taxes, and the ship to addresses and so on. And then the other file would be the detail file, and that's the detail of the ticket, the parts that were on it, how many were sold, how much it was sold for, and so on. I'm going to start to get to this file by going to my Y menu, System Utilities. I'm then going to go to my D, Data Import Export Utilities, and last, number 1, Create ASCII Files. I'm going to type in my clerk code. Again, first thing you need to know is where you're pulling the data from. So there are 3 pages of files here that you can pull any kind of information from. I'm going to press the F2 key just to show you halfway down the column on the right is your TAF-D and your TAF-H. That's just what the file names are called. But one of them is your archive detail and one of them is your archive header. So if you have questions on how to pull data or what information might overlap so you can pull it from one place instead of the other, call us and we can help you with that. I'm going to press my F1 prior key to go back to the main screen or the first screen here, and I'm going to pull data out of my ARF file. That's my account receivable. So what I'm actually pulling out of the system is a listing of all of the account numbers because I want to use it to convert the account numbers for another video here. I'm going to pull the information out in the format that I would use instead for like a mailing list. It's getting up to the holidays. We want to send out holiday cards to all of our best customers or all of the customers who have created a house charge ticket in this calendar year, whatever criteria you want to use. So I'm going to pull it out in that form. So I'm going to click on the Enter key to pick this file. And I have a file that's already saved called Account Listing, and that's basically what I'm trying to pull, but I'm going to create a new one just so we can run through each of the screens. So I'm going to press the Enter key to get past my saved library jobs, and it's going to bring me to the default screen. Now at the top of the screen it says Accounts Receivable ASCII File. So if for some reason this says Inventory, you clicked on the wrong button. It's telling you exactly where it's pulling the information out of. I'm going to start from the top down. I'm going to click on the Report Store Options button at the top, and this is just, do I want to run this in the background? Now this is kind of up to you. If you want to run it on a schedule or if you're going to pull a lot of data, then absolutely send it to the background. It'll either run immediately, or if you have the V1 batch inactive, it'll catch it so that you can schedule it. I don't have many counts in this data system, so I'm going to say no, that I don't need to run it in the background. I'm just going to run it in the foreground. I'm going to press the Home to Return key to get back to my main screen and click on the second box down, the Print Options. Now, when I'm creating an ASCII file, the purpose of what I'm doing is to create a file that I can either open in Microsoft Excel, I can email it to a customer or to a coworker. I can take the information in a file and do something with it. I can save it for a rainy day, whatever. So if you want to output this to something, absolutely go right ahead, but that's not really the purpose of creating something in the ASCII Create. So if you see here, my options are to print to a printer, to print to my screen, and none. I would use screen if I was setting the screen up and wanted to make sure that I wasn't overlaying any information, especially if I'm trying to cram stuff into the screen. But for my purposes here, I'm just going to create a very basic file, so I'm going to click on none because I don't want to print anything. And I'm going to click on the Home to Return key. So the selection options is my third area that I can go to, and this is selecting options within the file that I'm in. So I'm in AR. I can choose accounts that have, for the example that I gave you of creating an account listing for holiday cards. I can print out a range of accounts. Maybe they're my house charge accounts. I can find accounts where the date of last sale is 2016 something. I can find accounts where they're, you know, my top 10 accounts, my top 100 accounts. However I want to use the selection criteria, I can do that here. If I know my field letters, I can just enter them. And if I don't, I can click on my help screen, and this is going to give me a listing of all of the valid field letters that I could use either as filters or once I get to the other screen to add a column of information to report upon. I'm going to press the home key, and because, as I mentioned, my AR is really small in this demo system, I'm just going to press the home key and I'm going to return every account. Calculation or sort options. Now, because I'm pulling out an address listing, I have no reason to go in here and do any calculating. But if I was pulling out an inventory value report or something out of my part tracking by account, perhaps something out of my archive, I can absolutely use the calculations and the sort options in any way that I want to. One thing to note, the benefit of running an ASCII file over running a file, for example, out of D4, your inventory report generator, is that this ASCII file isn't going to give me any header information except for on the very first page. So if I'm pulling an inventory value in detail and I want to cut out all of the extra information because I'm going to open this in Microsoft Excel and do something with it, if I created in the ASCII create, I'm not going to have any spaces where there's a header from the previous page, or there's spaces where there would be a page break if I was to print it to a physical printer. So that's one reason that you might want to use the ASCII create program instead of using just your report generator. I'm going to press on the home to return key to get back to my main screen. And the last button is the most important. This is my file creation options. Your drive, unless you know differently, is 5. That represents your C drive. Your user group is almost always 2, and that 2 represents the user data folder that's on your server. If you have multiple people who are creating files, you may have your own user group. Or if you're trying to make sure that your data stays secure and that no one goes into your user data folder, which is a great idea, you might have a different user group number to enter here. You would know that information. If you're unsure about whether you have multiple user groups to export and import data into and from, call us and we can take a look in your setup screens and see if there's an extra user group that you could do. The one benefit to exporting ASCII creates into a user group that is not user data, or importing price updates into a file that's not user data, is that no one gets into the user data and starts messing around with live files. So I actually like the idea of adding additional user groups for ASCII creates, especially if a lot of people create a lot of files, but that's completely up to you. The name of the file is what I'm going to call it. I'm going to call it arlist.txt. Press my enter key. Now you'll notice on the right hand side that there are name designators. If I put the ampersand onto my or into my name, it's going to add my store ID when I create the file. I can also pull out information with date formats, which is fantastic because if I'm running an inventory value report, if I run one to a file, then I need to go and find that file at the end of every month, pull the information out to a separate file on my desktop, and rename it. In this case, it's going to stamp that file name with my date, so the information can sit in my user data folder or my whatever user group I'm exporting to forever because there's a date stamp on it. So if you're going to export things and schedule them, absolutely use your date formats, then you won't overwrite any data. Do I want to delete the existing file? This is a yes/no question. If you want to overlay the file that you've created if you're continuously running this, you would say yes. If you say no, it's going to append to the bottom of the file. Do I want to use extended captions? Meaning, do I want to use English words as my captions? That's up to you. Do I want to create column headings? This is kind of funny because depending on how you answered the question previously, we're now asking you whether you even want columns. So perhaps those should have been switched. But this is basically saying, do you want column headers on your form, or are you going to use this in Excel perhaps and you don't want any headers? You know what's in every column. So you determine that. I'm going to say yes. And then, do I want to truncate the file output? No, I don't. Do I want to email this to myself? Now, here's a way to get around using the user data folder or accessing the user data folder. If you have an email server on your server machine, you can email these files to yourself. Number one, then you get multiple copies. You're not overlaying the information. But number two, then you don't have anybody accessing user data and accidentally deleting files that they shouldn't. So that's actually a very smart field to use if you have an email server. Do you want to send it in zipped format? That's up to you. If you're sending an inventory value report in detail, meaning you're looking at every single part in your inventory on the report, then you may want to zip it. Again, in my case, this is a very short report, so there's no need to do that. And then, do I want to use a designated file name? In my email, do I want to see a legitimate file name, or do I want to see, I think they code it as EML and then like a serial number. So do you want to use a legitimate file name here, yes or no? If you're sending a listing of tickets to a customer or something, or to a vendor, you would absolutely want to use a designated file name. If you're just sending it to yourself, it's up to you. Now, delimiters. Delimiters are what separate information from field to field to field. You may have seen the word delimiter in either SBC previously or in Microsoft Excel if you're trying to separate information into different fields. We can use really any character as a delimiter, but you would need to know what the 2-byte representation is for that character. So 2C is a comma. That tells me that at the end of the field of information, you're going to find a comma, and if I was to open it in Excel or if I was to open it in Word, when I find a comma, that is the end of my previous field of information and the start of my new field of information. The one time that you don't want to use this is if you're pulling information out of AR especially, or out of your inventory, and you have commas in the description. So if I have an address, 100 Main Street, comma, Suite 101 in the same field, or I have, as I say, a description with a comma in it, my file is going to get screwed up if I try to open it and tell it that when it finds a comma, it needs to start a new column of information. If you were to open it in Microsoft Excel, your information would be off depending on the line of information. So if you have commas, or if you're not sure, then I would suggest not using commas and instead typing in a 09. A 09 represents a tab. So if you were to open this in Word, you would be able to see a space between each field of information. If you were to open it in Excel, you would tell the computer that the tab was your delimiter, and then every time the system finds a tab, it is going to create a space, and that's where your new field of information starts. The 0D0A record is something that's required. You don't really need to know what that means, but if you'd like to know, 100 years ago when people were using typewriters to write things, or 50 years ago, when you got to the end of a line, you hit your enter key, or you were just typing and you heard a ding, and your carriage moved back to the left-hand side of your piece of paper, and your line would move up, or your paper would move up a line. So that's what a carriage return line feed is. So this is telling it to put this record 0D0A information at the end of each valid line of information for you, so you basically know where your enter key would have created, would have been entered into the system so that you can start information on the next line. You don't need to know what that means. You just need to make sure that the information is in those fields. And last, 1A is a representation of where the end of your file is. So I would suggest in the future filling all these pieces of information in on your default screen and that saving that screen so that your users just bypass those instead of having to figure out what goes in those fields. So last is what my Excel sheet or my notepad or the file that I'm creating is going to look like. So for me, as I mentioned, I want my account number because I'm going to use this to convert files. But if I was going to use it to create something like a mailing list for my holiday cards, I would want more than the account number, obviously. So I'm going to type in the fields of information that I want to see on my output or see in my report. So I happen to know that ML1, 2, 3, and 4 are the lines of information that have to do with my addresses. ML1 is the customer's name. ML2 and 3 are my address lines. ML4 is my city, state, zip. I can add phone number if I want to. Now the nice thing about ASCII creates or ASCII files in addition is that, and I'm just going to do this just for an example, I'm going to space these out, but if I was to type in a bunch of information, notice that there's no limit other than me running out of fields when I get to the bottom of this page. There's no page length limit or page width limit because I'm exporting this information out into Notepad or out into Excel. I'm not printing this on a piece of paper. If you were going to run a report and print it to paper or print it to a file printer, you'd be stuck with the number of characters across the page. Once you hit the limit, your information is just going to overtype itself. So that's one more reason that it's very nice to be able to use an ASCII create to do whatever it is that you're going to do, is because you have no limit on the right-hand side of your screen or of your file. Once I've added all of the fields or all of the columns of information that I want to see in my sheet, I'm going to click on the Home key. Remember, the Help button is always available for you if you're not sure about what your field letters would be. I want to save this. I'm going to F10 to save the parameters. I'm going to call it ARL. I'm going to call it AR listing holiday. Press my Enter key, press my Enter key, press my Enter key. Now I could have entered a password, I could have entered a security level, but I'm printing out a list of account addresses. There's nothing confidential about any of that, so there's no need for me to try and put in a password that I'm going to have to remember. Buttons at the bottom of the screen, I can press the Escape key to get myself out of here, to exit. I can press the Enter key to start running this report. Control P will print my screen. Control X will change my printer. I'm not printing this to paper, so I have no need to click on that. The F5 Recall Job button, there is a video in this collection that will show you how to use that F5 button. So if you're unsure about that, or if you think that you need to use that, access that video or give us a call. F10 will save, and then Control F is options. Those options are, do I want to use extended captions? They're things you've already answered. So I'm going to say no, I don't want to truncate. And then my help over here on the right if I need it. I'm going to press my Enter key. Okay, so what my system has now done is it has created a report for me of all of the information, and it saved it as a .txt file. So I'm going to go into my user data folder. Remember, in this case, I'm accessing the information in user data, and I want to pull that file up. So I've minimized my window. I'm going to click on my user data shortcut, and I'm going to look for that file that I called ARList. So ARLIST. I can also scroll down to it if I wanted to. And I'm going to open this in Notepad. So open with Notepad. So here is my listing of information. Now, if my information on my screen happens to wrap, that's okay, because if I were to open it in Excel or in another program, it would just extend it over to the right. So depending on how you have Notepad set up, it may wrap the information. So you'll notice that some of the information on here is obviously not stuff that I would want to use if I was sending out letters. I'm not going to send one to my cash account. These guys have no address. So I would have a situation where I could come into my Notepad file, and I could delete all of the information that I don't need. I don't need my transfer store accounts. I'm not going to send anything to my vendors, probably. So I'm going to clean up my file here. I can clean it up through Excel. I can do anything that I want. And you'll notice that there's this space here. This is a tab, and then this here is a tab. So that is that's the character that's separating these pieces of information for me, so that if I was to open it in Excel, it would know where to start the new column of information. Now a couple of pieces of information to remember here. If you're dealing with things that are going to go back into SBC, so maybe you're looking at this because you're going to convert data back into SBC. We don't like funky characters. So trademark signs and things like that, if you're looking in a file like this with the intent to put it back into SBC, I don't know how it would have gotten there initially, but it may have through a conversion or an import of data. The part or account probably had some problems with it if you were trying to sell with it or if you were trying to access it. But regardless, when you're in here, you want to make sure that you don't have any funky characters. The other thing is that depending on how you pulled the information out of the system, or depending on where you got the file from, you may see something like this. That means that either you had a bunch of bogus accounts in your system that didn't have a lot of information, but they were legitimate line items or legitimate pages that you could have gone to. The other thing, if you're importing the data, it may have been extra columns in Microsoft Excel. So when I'm in Notepad looking at the file, I want to make sure that I not only delete any funky characters, but I also go to the bottom of the file and I remove any extra rows of information that I don't need to have imported. It's not necessarily going to hurt you to import that data, it's just unnecessary wasted time. To save my file, I'm going to press the X in the upper right corner and I'm just going to say save. I don't want to save it as, because I don't necessarily want to change any of this information right now, but I can save it and it'll save all of those changes that I made in that file. If you have any questions on how to create an ASCII file or how to pull data out of SBC, please call us at 800-829-4722. You can also reach us by sending us an email at sbctraining@autolog.com. Thank you for your time.